Welcome to the Gold Report, where we inspire you to be 10% more courageous in your daily life. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll be right back after the break.
Somebody comes to us when they are the most vulnerable. We have an obligation to our patients to tell the truth as we learned it and to not politicize it. We are performing surgeries on these children, and the only people benefiting is the medical industrial complex, because the more surgeries that are done, the more money it is made.
Whether you're talking about an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old, I don't see how you can actually derive informed consent.
We all know that we can't be getting true informed consent.
Our medical industry has objectively been compromised in more ways than one.
You become familiar with the sound a mother makes when you tell her that her child is dead.
We have a special guest today, and that would be attorney Heather Gibson. Ms. Gibson advocates fearlessly for the rights of her clients by taking on insurance companies, utility providers, large-scale businesses, and most importantly, the government. Most recent clients have included the San Francisco firefighters, who were terminated from their positions for refusing COVID-19 shots, and many others who were threatened or actually lost their jobs. Heather attended the University of California, Davis as a pre-med student, but as she ended up fainting at the sight of blood, she changed her major to law. When she's not in a courtroom, you can find Heather lacing up her running shoes. She is a serious runner who qualified for the National Outdoor Track and Field Championships. Heather competed in the Olympic trials in 2008, but did not make it to the team in Beijing. Today, I'm honored to welcome attorney Heather Gibson to the Gold Report. So I really wanted to bring you back to the show, Heather, because you and I speak a lot, because we've had reason to work together a lot over the last several years since the COVID tyranny started. And you're just an incredible lawyer for freedom, for your passion for freedom. You, as the audience knows, you defended the San Francisco firefighters. You've done a lot to help people who were willing to stand up against tyranny, but needed the right soldier to do that. And I don't know if you've ever thought of yourself as a soldier, but you really are a soldier. Modern day soldiers are called lawyers, Lawyer is how you spelled soldier in the 21st century. So you and I have been in a lot of battles together. And one of the ones that meant the most to me personally, and I think to you as well, was my fight against the California Medical Board. So I'm just going to summarize it for like 1 minute, and then you'll take it from there. So the California Medical Board came after me in December of 2021, alleging that I had engaged in misinformation regarding hydroxychloroquine. That was their stated reason. That's the letter that they wrote to me. And we had to fight them ever since. And so you and I started working together. And as we wound through that process, it was very difficult for me as a client, it was very difficult to know if what they were after was the misinformation, their supposed misinformation regarding hydroxychloroquine, or if they were more interested in the fact that I had taken a misdemeanor plea regarding the Capitol January 6th events, the remaining and entering. And I know that you, as the attorney, were really trying to find out for them what this truth was. But then we go to trial in November of 2023, and we discover at trial that they really wanted to talk mostly about January 6th, and they wanted to link that to being unprofessional, which is a threat on our license. So I have a couple questions for you, if you could just bring people up to speed. Is that your understanding? Because my understanding as a client was I really wasn't sure if the California Medical Board was trying to say that I had engaged in misinformation, or if I had unprofessional conduct regarding the misdemeanor trespass. What was your impression as a lawyer leading the case?
So initially it was amorphous. The investigation started in, I believe it was, years ago, years before the trial ever took place. And when we did our 800C request under the California Business and Professions Code, we asked for all of the information about why they wanted to bring an accusation against you, what their investigation had revealed, and any complaints that they had against you. And what we found when we did that is that there were no patient complaints against you. There was nobody who said that you treated them and something went wrong. Instead, what we got was there might have been someone from a committee, probably a leftist sort of a backed committee who was a physician who didn't like what you had to say and sent a complaint to the medical board based on what you were saying in speeches. And there wasn't a whole lot more than that initially. We just knew that they wanted to come after you and that there were no patient complaints. Then, many months later, they started saying, oh, well, we want to bring January 6th into it because there was a misdemeanor conviction. But to me, that didn't make any sense at all because there's no literally zero relationship between a misdemeanor trespass and your qualifications, functions, and duties as a medical doctor. So that raised a lot of red flags. And honestly, we didn't really know what they were going to do until motions in limine right before the trial. And that's where their position became clear. I think they realized you had 4 or 5 fantastic, really well-read, um, reputable experts on your side who would have said, "You did absolutely the right thing. Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, all of these treatments that you had spoken about saved many, many lives." And I think they may have thought at that point, "Well, we've got something stronger to go with. Let's just hedge all of our bets on January 6th." Or sorry, yeah, January 6th of 2021. And I think that's what they did.
Oh, I love that you said that because I haven't asked you that directly, but I found it really confusing prior to the trial with them, and I felt, I was very surprised when I took a trial that it was all about January 6th, and the reason I was so surprised is because I thought I lived in a nation where you couldn't undergo really 2 trials, and it seemed like it was a second January 6th trial. Everybody knows I went through a legitimate January 6th criminal process, in the District of Columbia Criminal Court. So I was very surprised that the California Medical Board was supposedly taking a legal interest in that. So that was November of '23, and you were the lead attorney on defending me in the proceeding against the California Medical Board. If you could summarize for people, what happened during that trial?
So that was first of all, I have to put this with the backdrop that this was my first hearing against the California Medical Board, and this was Simone Gold. This wasn't, somebody who the world didn't know. This is somebody with like what millions of followers, and I in the back of my mind, I was going, if we win this case, no one's ever going to talk about it. It will never be in the press. They'll do everything they can to sweep it under the rug, and if we lose, it's going to be everywhere. Like I'll be the attorney that lost like the big case against the medical board, and I think this, and there were a few other cases where, including the firefighters, I just felt so much conviction after reading through the evidence that you had been set up by the state, by the Department of Justice, um, for a fall that you should never, ever have had to take. And that was very unsettling for me as an attorney, as a citizen of the US. Seeing that happen to anyone is appalling. But especially to a medical doctor, right? They're going after doctors, they're going after lawyers, and I think you did what you had to do, which is to say, I'm drawing a line in the sand here, and we're not going past it, and I will fight you because what you're doing is wrong. So I felt just a great deal of conviction. I do believe almost like it was like God telling me, you're going to take this case. Don't worry about it. I know you haven't done this before, but you're right for it, and you're going to win if you try hard, if you do everything you're supposed to do, you read all the statutes, you read all the cases, and you know the case, and you read the evidence, you're going to win. So I felt a great deal of conviction about doing what was right in this case. That's one of the main reasons I wanted to take this case. But you were undoubtedly now um, set up. And the medical board took the position that the plea agreement you signed was fact, and that there was no way that you possibly could have known what happened to a police officer who fell down in front of you. Um, and they told you that he'd been pulled down by a mob of people, and you had no way to know because you weren't even close enough to really figure that out at the time. It turns out later on, he fainted. He was being pressed in by the crowd. He had been pepper sprayed. You couldn't possibly know that, and he fainted. So what the medical board did is they took the plea agreement, that said that there was an officer in front of you had fallen down. They said it was a few feet away, and they tried to somehow make that substantially related to the qualifications, duties, and functions of a medical doctor. But it was all manufactured. And that was so insidious. And it was smart, right? It was like they were very smart and very evil at the same time. And and I think what the judge recently said, I mean, I know we haven't gotten there yet on the writ, is hey, I saw the video. I saw the evidence, and what you guys did was you set her up, and it's not going to stand. And that to me is justice. And that is why we fight these fights. But you are kind of the poster child for, yeah, there were some bad things that happened on January 6th, and there were some bad actors, but you were not one of them. And for the medical board to take this and run with it and try to take away your medical license was absolutely wrong. You are a fantastic doctor, as all of your witnesses said, even the ones who run the hospitals, et cetera, the medical directors. So I know I'm probably skipping way ahead here, but there's just so much to cover in what
Yeah.
happened, and what they
So,
did was really evil.
so I just I'm thank you for like going the background. I'm gonna probably jump around a little bit myself too. So we were a little bit surprised. You were prepared for everything. I just want to say that you were prepared if this was a free speech case. You were prepared if they were going to allege misinformation. We had to be prepared on multiple fronts. But it turns out during the trial, they tried to say that I was near an officer who was assaulted and therefore I shouldn't be a practicing licensed physician, which, by the way, is crazy on its face. It was a very frenetic moment. There was a human being who was, many feet away from me who fainted, and that it was just crazy that that was somehow being linked. But I think you're right. They looked to make this look like it was something when it really wasn't. The very frustrating part was, and you and I talked about this before the trial, was that the government had me sign a plea deal while the government had evidence that the paper they proffered to me was not consistent with the evidence that they had, and they didn't share the evidence with me that was contradictory to their plea. And then you and I are preparing for the trial, and you are correctly warning me that I have to tread very lightly here because I couldn't look like I've perjured myself in signing a plea. But the the sentence looked damning, which was their intent, that I was near an officer who was assaulted. But I want to share with people that the definition of assault is not punching someone. That's actually battery. Assault can be a threat. So I said, well, I signed a piece of paper that, there was an assault of a guy and maybe he was assaulted and I didn't see it. It was in somewhere in the vicinity. And that's how come I was very clear that I hadn't perjured myself. But all this became very, I would say, muddied and convoluted during the trial. And the big question is, what does any of this have to do with the practice of medicine? And so we were hoping that the judge in the California Medical Board trial would just simply say, hey, this really had nothing to do with the practice of medicine. Maybe it wasn't the best, finest day Dr. Gold ever had in her life. I mean, I was kind of hoping he would say that, but how did the ruling come out?
I mean, the ruling from the administrative law judge at the lower level from the OAH came out, and he wrote a long opinion. It was probably 40 pages long. And he came out saying, it would not serve any public purpose if you were to be suspended from the practice of medicine. He obviously found that you were a great, competent doctor and that, it wouldn't serve anyone's best interest to take you out of the field. He said, no probation was going to be necessary. And he also said, of course, your license wouldn't be revoked. But he did find, oddly, that the occurrences that took place on January 6th of 2021 were substantially related to the qualifications, functions, and duties of a medical doctor and surgeon. And the way that he got there, based on my reading of his decision, is he analyzed it was mostly based on a case called Griffiths. Um, and the Griffiths case dealt with a man who was a doctor who was pulled over and arrested 3 different times and charged with and convicted of 3 separate misdemeanors for drunk driving. The circumstances of those arrests were, he fought with the officers. He took one of their batons. He pretended that he was working with Johnny Cochran. He told people that he was on his way to get medication for his wife when he was like blowing a .15, like just out of his mind, drunk, driving around recklessly. So, in that case, even though the act of drunk driving is not necessarily substantially related to the qualifications, functions, and duties of a medical doctor, you could reasonably make the argument that drinking and driving happens when you have an alcohol problem, and that if you have an alcohol problem, it's also likely that that might spill over into your professional life and practice, and therefore you want to take someone like that out of the operating room and out of a physician's practice before they do something terrible to a patient, make sure that they get help and rehabilitated before they're ever allowed back into that circumstance. So, um, they tried to use that as the precedent to sort of say, look, in this case, there was a misdemeanor. There were several misdemeanors, and although they weren't related to medicine, the court found and held that this guy was going to lose his medical license. And of course, we said, wait a wait a minute, like time out. That has nothing to do with our case. Like, this is a one-time misdemeanor trespass. There's no alcohol, there's no drugs involved. Why are we even talking about this case? But that's what Judge Levy said, Abraham Levy said in his decision. And it was at that point, Dr. Gold, where you were the tenacious one who said, um, I should not be publicly reprimanded, and I should not have to take an ethics class, which is what Abraham Levy ultimately ordered at the lower court level. Um, you said, I'll teach an ethics class, I'll do that, I'll do it for free, but I don't want to take their ethics class, and I shouldn't have to have any sort of public reprimand. And it was at that point where we decided to take a writ of mandate and go to the Superior Court.
Yeah. So procedurally, that means it's like we're appealing what the judge said. So I do think most people would have sat tight and said, "Great, this is a victory." And I mean, for sure, it was a victory. It was for sure it was a victory. I mean, the California Medical Board wanted me to never be a doctor again, and we 100% shut that down. But my bigger problem is that the courts need to call out executive agencies that are usurping power. I don't believe the California Medical Board has any authority whatsoever to weigh in on this issue of a person who's at a political protest, that things were very complicated that day. There's a whole criminal process for that. Exactly who empowered the California Medical Board to have authority in that realm? That, for me, is the definition of usurpation, which George Washington warned us against. Because usurpation is when a political entity takes power that it's not been granted. So I felt very, very strongly about it. And so then you drafted and you did all the work essentially on the appeal, called a writ of mandate, but the appeal of this issue. And we recently heard from the judge on that. And how did that go?
So I think that the San Diego County Superior Court justice who heard this matter really took the time to read all of the pleadings. He really took the time to read the cases. It was clear that he was well versed on what was going on. It was also clear that he had taken the time to watch the video evidence that was presented. And there were maybe 7,000 pages of between the transcripts from the lower court and from all of all of the pleadings that had been filed in this case. And so we lodged those with his court, and it took him about a month after the hearing to come out with a decision, which came out yesterday, December 10th. And he went through an analysis of all of the major issues that were presented, and he came out with a finding that it did in fact look as though Dr. Gold had been set up by the Department of Justice. He did mention the issue with the police officer and said, I know that the state is taking this position, but it doesn't seem like that's what happened. And the finding was she never should have had a public reprimand, and she never should have had to take an ethics course. And DOJ, you're going to have to pay her costs for this, because you wasted a lot of her time. So, and her money. So, that was the ultimate finding, and I think he came out of this the right way, and the way that he got there was, totally different from the way that Judge Levy got to his decision at the lower court level. This judge found that the conduct on January 6th of 2021 relating to a misdemeanor trespass was not substantially related to the practice of medicine, and that was the correct finding. I don't think there's any other way to look at it. I mean, even I think the most liberal Democrats would probably agree that a misdemeanor trespass on its own without any other charges does not amount to something that is substantially related to the practice of medicine.
It's kind of funny. I was thinking of one of the doctors who testified blessedly, in my defense is essentially, how I am as a physician, who happens to be really on a have very different political views than I do, for example. But he knows me very well as a doctor. And I remember he just spontaneously during the trial, the lower trial said, "Well, what does any of this have to do with practicing medicine? Like, she's a great doctor." And it was just so spontaneous and heartfelt, like how he just said it, like authentically. Like, I don't even get like why this is the thing. And I do feel vindicated on my own behalf and also for everyone going forward. Lawyers, of which I'm one, are very concerned about precedent. I mean, this whole thing got derailed, not derailed, but people always are looking for precedent. So they pull in this Griffith case, which is about a guy who's multiple times drunk driving, and they're quote using that as precedent. But for now, we're going to have precedent that clearly establishes what cannot be pulled in as related to the practice of a licensed professional. I mean, I feel like that's an important
That's right.
precedent.
Yeah,
Do you
I mean, I cannot emphasize enough either, that the Department of Justice during their questioning in the trial, they had a lot of questions about your political beliefs, who you supported for the presidency, um, all of that, which is totally inappropriate at a disciplinary hearing of any kind. But you could tell they were trying to take that information and bias a judicial officer against you based on your political beliefs. And I think that maybe next time, maybe they'll think twice before they do that.
It's funny. That was actually the most important part of the trial. And I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, they went on and on and on about what I thought politically. I mean, I think that went on for half a day. It was incredible. And you objected mightily and aggressively every time. What did I think? What did I tweet? Why did I say this? How do I believe? It was honestly, it was really scary. Like as an American, my father grew up in a communist nation, and you were not allowed to publicize your political beliefs. And I couldn't believe the questioning. How do we think, or how do you think this case might affect other licensed professionals or any other type of license holder in the state of California, or maybe even throughout the nation? The fact that I went up and I was accused, I was being told that I should lose my professional license due to a misdemeanor trespass that has nothing to do with the profession at hand. Like, do you think that this could affect other licensees or other professional license holders?
Yeah. So I would say that yes, this case could very well have a beneficial impact on just about every group of people who holds a professional license. Um, and that is because, just as with your case, when we looked at cases with physicians, attorneys, accountants, contractors, there were all kinds of groups of people who hold professional licenses who've dealt with disciplinary hearings. And just as those cases were used as precedent in your case, now your case can be used as precedent in the future for theirs. So yes, I think that this is going to have a great beneficial impact on all kinds of industries all over the state, for sure.
This is great. I just want to say to the freedom doctors out there and the freedom healthcare workers who really we stood up and took so much in the last 4 to 5 years. It was unbelievable what was thrown at us. We needed to have freedom attorneys by our side to help us extricate ourselves and navigate this really tyrannical terrain. So this is really scoring one for the good guys. I can't wait until My fellow Freedom doctors hear about this case because they will be comforted. There were many of us that really went up against the various medical boards. Mostly we won. People asked me the other day if I knew many doctors who lost their license. And in fact, there really aren't. But the hassle and the cost and the emotional pain that is being dragged through this process is enormous. So we now have good precedent on our side. So score one for the good guys.
There's one more thing I'd like to add real quickly, Dr. Gold, if that's okay.
Please.
Do I have a minute?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I just want to say I am not working for a big firm. I work for a very small firm. We have 2 lawyers. We have a fantastic staff. But I had never done this before. I had never like had a trial against the Department of Justice attorneys. And so I really want to encourage people who just feel like they're, look, I'm just this normal person living my normal life and, I'm happy doing what I do. I just want to encourage you to take a chance and get out of your comfort zone and do something because you believe it is right and it is just and it is the good thing to do. And I really can't emphasize enough how much conviction I felt about this case. I literally felt like God was telling me, I got you. You're going to take this case and it's going to be fine. Just do your work and I'm right here with you. And it worked out. But it gave me so much courage when I just had that feeling of conviction. And I think that if you are one of those people who's on the fence and who knows that doing something is right, but it's a little bit scary, do it and see what happens. That's my challenge. I think that it's really important to do what's right, even if it's uncomfortable.
I have nothing to add to that. That's incredible. I think everyone can see why I enjoy working with you so much. It's about following what you know is right, and everything will ultimately be okay in the end. And in fact, it will be better. Like now you can say that you literally did something professionally that you hadn't done before. It was David versus Goliath. I mean, what could be more Goliath than the federal government, or in this case, like a
Very much.
state government, right? And
They have
then
all the resources,
they have all the
everything. They have all the
resources.
money, all the power. And it
Yeah,
was like for this little guy, but we were right. You were
yeah,
right. And
I
that's what
love
ended
it.
up mattering.
Thank you so much, Ms. Heather Gibson, a extraordinary attorney. If you'd like to, I don't even know if you're on social. If you probably are not on social. If you wanted to
I
share
like
anything
to
about how to reach
fly under
you.
the radar.
Okay, I totally get it. That used to be me. I don't even have the luxury anymore. But
But maybe now I won't.
I think the world is going to come find you. But I'm so glad. I am so grateful. I'm grateful that you helped myself as the representative for America's frontline doctors and for all the people out there who really were being pushed around by the government. You've done a great thing in this legal case, and I hope that we don't talk in 20 years when there's another doctor who's being targeted and we'll have to call it the precedent, but we'll let them know the precedent exists, but we hope that that day doesn't come. So
It's the
thank
gold
you so
standard.
much.
It's the new precedent.
It's the gold standard. Love it. I absolutely love it. Love it. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon, and thank you for your excellent representation, Ms. Heather Gibson.
Anytime, Dr. Gold. You take care.
Thanks for joining me on The Gold Report, where we hope to have inspired you to be 10% more courageous. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.